We'll be starting in just a few minutes. This is Amber Peters from Elgin Partnership for Early Learning. I am one of the co-chairs for Unite 46, and we're glad you're here tonight.
While you're waiting, there is a white piece of a sign-in sheet at your table. If you want to go ahead and make sure that everyone at your table is signed in, that would be really helpful. All right, so as a reminder, as we go through this process, you may have a question that arises in your group that we do not have necessarily time to address, or something that you may want to provide input on an aspect of the process. So these questions and input do not have to be directly related to the topic we are studying at tonight's meeting. But so you can fill out an I have a question form and turn it in at the end of the meeting. There should be kind of plenty of those floating around the room and at your tables. If you need one, please go ahead at any time and ask one of us. We're happy to give you one of those I have a question forms. You can also ask a community member or district representative during the small group work activity time if those questions come up as you're working. So for those of you who are new to our process, and as a refresher, for those of you who joined us a few weeks ago, we're going to go ahead and take a minute just to review why we're here. So over the next few months, we're going to learn about, review, and understand some of these important topics. So the vision of the Board of Education to close, rebuild, repurpose, or remodel our oldest elementary school buildings, move to a true middle school model with grades 6 through 8, and expand pre-K programming in our district. The long-term challenges regarding facility maintenance and repairs, how buildings impact student performance, and current enrollment projections and how they impact long-range facility planning, and then also the DLR Educational Facility Master Plan recommendations and the timeline that was presented to the Board of Education earlier this year. So using that information, we are going to develop recommendations about the following: how we can best support our students as we transition to middle schools and district-wide pre-K, how we can best support students through a future redistricting process, knowing that the district needs to find a way to most effectively use its more than 50 buildings, prioritizing building improvements, and offer input regarding the recommendations to retire, rebuild, or repurpose some of our school buildings, when these building improvements should happen, and finally, how we can fund these improvements. There are a lot of decisions that still need to be made, and together, through this Unite U-46 process, we have a lot of choices to make and feedback to provide in the coming months. Again, we really appreciate your partnership and your collaboration as we work together to move U-46 forward. Shonda's going to come up and she's going to tell you a little bit more about our plan and our topic for this evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shonda Schwartz. I'm one of the community chairs. Tonight, we will learn more about how our buildings impact teaching and learning and help our students succeed. Much of this presentation is rooted in the topics, issues, and questions that you all provided during the small group work activity last week. So thank you. Then we will have one more session in May before we take a break for the summer. Many of the groups at our last session wanted to learn more about pre-K and middle school. At our session on May 25th, we will take a deeper dive into these topics, why they are important for students, and how they will be implemented here in U-46. In the fall, we will get an inside look at the school buildings and develop recommendations. We know you may not be able to attend each session, but please attend as many as possible because your collective voice matters. You may notice you have a few more materials in your packets tonight than you did for our last session. At our first meeting, we went through a general orientation to become familiar with our community engagement process, and we learned more about U-46 and the facility planning process. Following our orientation, we rolled up our sleeves and began to work in small groups. One of our first tasks was to identify the key questions and topic areas we need to address to develop our recommendations. We were impressed with how productive you were in that work session, and we will use that information to develop our course of study over the next few months. We have documented all of your work with that from that session and have provided it as part of your materials packet tonight. The first item in your packet is a document that contains the verbatim responses from each small group activity at our first meeting. From those verbatim responses, we have created the next document, which is an executive summary of the responses. Also included are the general consensus points. These are the points of general agreement from all of the in-person and virtual work groups at the meeting. The next document is a copy of this evening's informational presentation, then tonight's work activity. We have also included a flyer that has all of our future sessions listed. We encourage you to share this with your friends and family and bring them with you to our next session. All of this information is also available on the Unite U-46 website. You can also take a few minutes to learn more about the process online and help us spread the word about upcoming community engagement sessions via social media by following U-46, their Facebook or Twitter page, the Unite U-46 website, our online customer service tool, Let's Talk, or you can also contact us via email. It is now my pleasure to introduce B. Sanborn and Carrie Van Sant from DLR Group, which helped develop the U-46 Educational Facilities Master Plan. Tonight, they are going to provide us with information about how school buildings have a direct impact on the success of our students. The information they share will help us as we build the foundation for our recommendations at the end of this process. Specifically, with insight on how we may be able to best address some of our building and enrollment challenges, prioritize building improvements, and develop feedback on buildings that were recommended as candidates to be retired, rebuilt, or repurposed. This work will start tonight after their presentation tonight during our work activity tonight, where we have 3 tasks, one of which is ranking the importance of a number of criteria that could be used to prioritize U-46 building updates. We look forward to hearing your feedback at the end of the evening. Okay, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Carrie and B.
All right, good evening. Nice to see everyone here and welcome everyone that's joining virtually. I'm Carrie Van Sant. I'm an architect and project manager with DLR Group. I've been practicing for over 17 years and very much focused in K-12 education. With me tonight is B. Sanborn.
Hi, I'm B. Sanborn. I'm DLR Group's design research leader. I'm not an architect. I'm an anthropologist and a psychologist who focuses on buildings and how they impact people. So it's my job to help all of our teams think about how we make decisions for projects with research and how we can use that mindset to understand the success of projects.
All right. Just to kind of provide some context, during the master planning process, we worked with the cabinet with input from the steering committee, which was made up of a number of different partner groups within the district, business partners, community members, parents, students, to develop guiding principles for the master plan. And these guiding principles are meant to look back on, reflect, make sure that whatever the outcomes come out of implementation and the projects as they come to fruition in the future are aligning and meeting these guiding principles. Some of the data points reviewed during the master planning process are listed here. There are a number of things here related to the age of things, of facilities, how large this are, as well as things like square foot per student, which directly impacts capacities at different buildings, as well as access to dedicated spaces for certain programs. We also looked at things like energy, indoor environmental quality, and we had workshops and surveys. So thank you to all of you that participated in those workshops and surveys. It was great to have your voice in the process. We've got the next 3 slides are some takeaways of findings that we have, some challenges in the district, operational, functional, and how we can build equity across the district. we've got a lot of aging facilities in U-46. There's a variation in age of facility as well as building conditions and energy use across the district. We also know about declining enrollment. You learned about that in the last session. And we've learned there's a number of just general traffic, parking, drop-off, congestion at a number of the building sites. So those are really operational in nature. When considering functional challenges, there's, having secure check-ins and safety and security at the building is front and center. We also saw some opportunities for creating collaborative, hands-on learning environments for more future ready for today's teaching and learning and tomorrow's. There's also a varying degree of access to green space and site amenities and play areas across the district's facilities. So talking about building equity, some of the things we found is that there's varying degrees and of physical accessibility for your district. So not all buildings are reachable for all people. There's certain spaces that are hard for students and staff to get to. And also space per student, which directly correlates to the capacity within a building, as well as some of the dedicated program spaces, for instance, maybe art or music, having dedicated classrooms in certain buildings, but perhaps not in other buildings just because of the enrollment differences in those buildings varies. There's and that leads to that uneven capacity and utilization that we found. But the district is also doing some great things. And so we want to make sure that we highlight those as well. So the district has taken on new furniture, fixtures, and equipment. We coin that as FF&E in our industry across the district. This is really a good way to step into that creating those flexible, adaptable environments within the build spaces you have within each of the buildings. And they're employing these across a number of schools in the district. We also know that with the pandemic, it gave a little push, and all the students are one-to-one. All the students have devices now. So that is another thing the district is working with is this increase in technology district-wide and making sure the right services are provided to students and staff. And then the district has made great strides in updating high school libraries and creating spaces for their pathways and CTE programs. So this is just a reminder from the last community engagement session where Superintendent Sanders walked through some initial steps in the timeline. This is related to the recommendations that went in front of the Board of Education at the end of January. So really the first step is repurposing Hawk Hollow as a middle school and adjusting the boundaries to allow for that, as well as future making that shift for sixth grade up to the middle school level and making space for pre-K as was discussed earlier. The next few slides we'll go through. You'll identify your buildings in here, but this is just to give some context of the different school designs that you have within the district. This is the second largest district in the state, as I'm sure you're aware. And there's, as I mentioned before, a varying degree of ages of facilities. So you've got schools that were first built in late 1890s. So at that time, there was a large focus on large open spaces, large open windows to bring in natural light, passive natural ventilation to these spaces. Through the years in the 40s and 50s, we had the post-war suburban boom. How fast can we get these schools up? It was less about creating energy efficient, adaptable buildings, but more cost conscious and how quickly can it be done and how standardized can it be done. And then we hit the energy crisis in the 70s. So a number of buildings in the 70s had zero to very few windows and access to daylight. And now schools and districts are working with ways to find opportunities to bring the natural daylight and ventilation back to those spaces. A lot of focus on mechanical ventilation, electric light. And this was also an experimental time with open plan schools. However, with those open plan schools came a lot of issues with acoustics and privacy between classrooms and movement between spaces to get to other spaces. Then we have in the early 2000s a shift to energy efficient and sustainable design. More of a focus, even just recently, more in the last 10 years, on healthy indoor environmental quality and safety and security within the buildings. So this slide helps us understand the energy use in schools. So schools, you'll see the chart on on the right. There are a number of different things that are the result in energy use, mainly with heating and cooling systems and lighting systems in the schools. Some of the top factors are efficiency of heating and cooling systems, the quality of the building envelope. So when we talk about some of those post-war construction buildings, their building envelopes, their walls, their windows, their roofs are not like they are with today's codes and standards. Occupant practices, what you're doing in those buildings greatly impact the type of ventilation you need. And then having building automation and control systems also impact the amount of energy that might be used. So energy, and it's not just about energy, but improvements to building systems is found to improve occupant comfort, improve acoustical comfort. Sometimes if you've ever been in a room with really loud mechanical equipment or buzzing light fixtures, it can throw you off and be very distracting. And even for some of our most sensitive learners, it's escalated in nature. Also, improving our building systems helps to improve our air quality in our schools, which correlates to more attention, more engagement. So there's been questions about opportunities for sustainable design within the district. As I mentioned, with the district's huge portfolio of buildings, it's a great opportunity as improvements are made around the district to implement sustainable design strategies to help lower energy costs, create more reliable, comfortable environments, and also set us on a proactive path for maintenance, but also create an opportunity and a learning experience for students. So there's a number of different opportunities when we talk about career and technical education, CTE, and our pathway programs to be able to teach students about renewable energy, for instance, but then employ those at the buildings and allow them an opportunity to take part in even see installations and progress, but also have learning on display through dashboards and that within the building. So this might ring home to some of you. So on the left are pictures of classrooms in the 70s. On the right are pictures of classrooms today. And the biggest difference is we were in the 70s leading up to the 90s, and that we were very much so still on the industrial model of education, which meant the teacher was the sage on the stage. Everybody sat in rows and desks, and they listened to the teacher provide lectures. Today, it's much different, and Bea will talk more about that in the presentation. But it's not just about operational improvements, and that's what I alluded to with some of the functional challenges prior. Some of the things that impact a school's site size are shown here, whether it's the type of school, be the elementary, middle, and high, will all have varying site needs and requirements. How many students are attending it, where it's located, if it's very urban or suburban, will also have an impact on the size of a site. And then factors that influence building site have changed over time. As you see, as a comparison from the industrial model to where we are now, there are definitely changes in the type of curriculum, how students are working in class, which also impact the space students need. And these are some of those learning activities. So districts, K-12 districts across the country are being asked to provide more and different activities for their student, whether it's explicitly or implied as part of modern teaching and learning. And this requires more space than sitting at a desk. So if you can imagine just sitting at a desk for 7 hours out of the day versus being up and doing hands-on learning, collaborating with groups, moving from space to space, it takes more space, right? But getting up and moving also helps energize those students, and it helps them reset and refresh. That increased movement also it doesn't just mean increased square footage, but it does have an impact on your building systems. So your building systems are designed, for an industrial model. So those also have to change and adapt with your students and your spaces as well, so that they're ventilating and conditioning those spaces to accommodate those teaching and learning activities. During the master planning process, one of the ways we look to find an equalizing factor for the elementary schools, for an example, was targeting a square foot per student that could be utilized across all the buildings. So in our analyses, there are some buildings that are far above this and some that are far below this, quite frankly. And when you're lower than this target number, that means that your capacity, you're over enrolled in a particular building for the spaces that you have. So we utilize this as an equalizing factor to be able to balance enrollment, as the district has mentioned, and offer a better student experience to be able to access dedicated spaces for programs across the district. And you'll see, if you're familiar with U-46 Rising, their challenge to create, to move to team teaching and have more collaborative teaching experiences is something that the district is already doing today. So they're just needing those spaces to support their charge and their mission with education and teaching and learning in the district. And I will pass it off to you.
Thanks, Carrie. So this stat is slightly outdated. I think this number is probably higher after the past couple years of our lives, but there was a report generated around 2019 estimating that 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 don't exist now being 2019. I, for one, know that my job didn't exist when I was in elementary school, and I would wager that some of you also have a job that didn't exist when you were a child. I'm also really curious, and if you're on Zoom, hi everyone on Zoom, you can use the chat or the hand raiser, because I think you could all see who raises their hand to this. But in the room, will you raise your hand for me if you have learned something new for your job in the last 5 years? Will you keep your hand raised, please, if you taught yourself that and took it upon yourself to learn that thing? Good for you. I'm really happy to hear that. That's what we like. We want to keep learning through our whole lives. And this uncertainty about the kinds of jobs that are available to students, the kind of roles that they might play in their work life, means that one of the best things that we can equip them with is the ability to keep learning. The pace of change is going to continue to be so rapid that, again, the best thing we can do is know how to learn for the rest of our lives. That means new soft skills, like better ways to collaborate, say, when you're suddenly all remote, or it might mean new technological skills, such as how to suddenly go remote or teach remote or learn remote. The ability to gain new knowledge is as valuable as the knowledge itself. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, there's also been a big shift, not in a new trend, but in an increase in an existing trend, and that is an increase in the desire for technology, but also technology access in most parts of a district. Blended learning was a focus before the pandemic, and we've all seen that it can really get us through some tough times and keep us connected when maybe we can't be together physically. So the questions here are, how do we get that technology to students, make sure they have internet access, and then set educators up with great spaces to teach from in a hybrid learning model? One of the two concepts that we're going to talk about tonight when we talk about the changes in teaching and learning is social emotional learning. And there are a lot of different ways to define this, so I've just given us one from a particular institute, which is that this is about the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that help children and adults develop healthy identities. Who am I? Manage emotions. How do I feel right now? What do I want to do about it? Manage and achieve personal and collective goals. How are we going to get there together? Show empathy for others. How do you feel? Establish and maintain supportive relationships and make responsible and caring decisions. A lot of us have learned these skills at various points in our lives, sometimes early in life, sometimes through hard work later in life. The goal here is to equip learners sooner so that they can thrive over their life course with a really good, robust set of social emotional skills. One teaching and learning model that has been connected to social emotional learning is inquiry-based learning. This is a student-centered approach. It's a cycle. It's not a straight line. It's not a factory line. It's certainly not industrial. It's much more what we call iterative. It goes in loops. And it is kind of the teaching version of how we solve problems in the real world. It starts with a question. It starts with wondering or being confused by something, not being able to do something. Then we move back and forth between phases as we learn to navigate and explore this issue with support from educators. Spaces can help support each of these stages and being able to move fluidly through them so that we're not interrupted by changing the space around, finding a spot to do the work we want to do. That is how we can physically support the kind of change we want to see. One thing that we also do in our master planning process is talk about those student pathways, because we know not every pathway leads to higher ed. Maybe the pathway doesn't lead to higher education right away, or maybe people go right into the workforce. I personally took a gap year or two, and it was one of the best parts of forming my future career decisions. So we did this in U-46 with students and teachers and talked about the pathways we see here, coming up with these three personas, these three representative students that we want to think about through the master planning process to make sure we're meeting all their needs, not just one particular pathway. So we've got students heading to college or university, students starting straight into the workforce, maybe in a local or family business, and students on unique paths, the kid who's already got their first business idea and they are ready to roll the day they graduate. As Carrie referenced, there are a lot of different learning activities in that inquiry-based model, and there is absolutely a place for lecture and direct instruction where we sit and listen and learn. But there are also things like hands-on learning, collaborating with others, focused study, just focusing yourself on your problem. And this second one from the bottom that we call practicing student agency. This is where learners are asked to direct their own time. If I need to learn this right now, if I want to work on this right now, what should I be doing? That's a really important life skill when somebody doesn't have to tell you how to do what you're doing, but rather helps you guide yourself to the right choice for the way you learn, the way you work, and how you might need to collaborate. So how does space come into this? We are fortunate to be part of a research consortium that looks at innovative learning models and innovative learning spaces, both from the vantage point of students and the vantage point of teachers. And you can see sort of a spectrum here from A on the left, which has kind of a very traditional classrooms down both sides of a hallway model, moving through these spaces where you see more and more, maybe it's very hard to see on this, but the middle one has some walls that you can move back and forth between the space to make them bigger or smaller, all the way over to very open plan spaces on the right. And the acoustics in these open plan spaces, I can assure you, have gotten a lot better. Thinking about how we set up the space and then design the space to make sure that larger or more open spaces aren't disruptive to nearby spaces is really important. But what we do see through studies in this consortium and other research institutes is that around about rooms C, D, you start to see both teachers and students get really engaged, not just in the learning process, but teachers collaborating with teachers and learning from watching each other teach and interact. I think a lot of folks probably in the room and listening on Zoom know that a huge part of a learner's success is down to the learner and the teacher. That is fundamentally a part of what helps people learn their own will and the people guiding them along that process. But multiple studies have shown that space does have an impact. The two things that space can do are either present a lot of obstacles and frustrations, noises, furniture, equipment that doesn't work, things that are in your way, things you can't move, or it can get out of your way and make what you're trying to do easier. It can flex really easily. Maybe the technology is particularly easy to set up and use, so you're not wasting time. And of that impact that space has on a learner's process, we can kind of split it up across 3 ways. And we call it FINS. It's an acronym, but we'll unpack it here. You don't have to memorize it. Really, what we're looking at is flexibility. How much can you change the room and how much can you move around while you're in the room so that you get good physical activity, maybe different configurations of the room for different types of learning. Individualization. How much can students change the room for what they need right then in learning, but also express themselves through displays, through sharing their own work, through maybe owning a part of the school and kind of expressing student culture. Then there's naturalness and nature. This comes in 2 forms. One is indoor environmental quality that Carrie mentioned. How can we make the inside of the building physically comfortable? The lighting is comfortable. It's not hurting our eyes, but we can see. The temperature is comfortable. It's not so cold we're falling asleep or so hot that we can't focus. The air quality is good because good air quality means clear thinking and that our bodies are physically comfortable. And then the other aspect of naturalness and nature is nature. Can we see plants and nature inside the building? Can we interact with green space outside the building? And the last wedge of this is stimulation. How colorful, complicated, visually loud is the space? How much is the space either energizing us or letting us relax? And again, there's a place for different combinations of all of these in a modern school because we want to provide variety for students as they move through that cycle and need different kinds of support. Again, healthy indoor environmental quality isn't just about being comfy. It's not just about comfort, but physical health. It changes our blood flow. It changes what we can see and hear, and it definitely changes how alert we are mentally and physically. So we're looking at providing spaces, as I said, that let students learn those social emotional skills, get involved in that inquiry-based learning, and then start to make some choices as they get older, practice that agency. How do you feel right now? Do you need to be in a cozy space where you feel comfy, introverted, and you can kind of snug away from the world? Or do you want to be out in the open interacting with people? How do you need to learn right now? Do you want to be in that more traditional classroom setting? Or like the kids on the right, are you going to sit on the floor? Because that's what you feel like doing right now and work with your friends. Practicing social skills. How will we collaborate? How will we learn to invite other people to work with us when we think they might have a cool idea? And again, blended learning. This is becoming more and more not just a thing that prepares students for the working world, but perhaps a necessity and part of our lives to be able to convert to this when the moment is right. There are things that we can also do to help the inside of the school feel really safe and welcoming. And one of those is a place that people can build public spirit around. This particular school has a kind of a funky, curvy design because it's for kindergartners. And I don't know how many people in here have a kindergartner or have had one. How fast do they walk? Not fast. So the question was, can we lay out this school to save actual kindergartner walking time to such a point that there's a noticeable amount of time back in the school week and the school year where we could instead meet other students, form relationships with teachers, hang out. And this curving shape helped us do that for this particular project. For identity and choice, again, we want to let people have privacy when they need it, but also let them see each other when perhaps they can learn just by watching what someone else is doing. This particular school has not classrooms, but what we call forts. And the walls change with every change in that inquiry-based learning plan, but the students know what's coming. They know right where to be when, and they have a say in setting up the pace of how often these rooms change around and how quickly the process goes. I'm sure you want to see more project stuff, so I'm going to hand it back to Carrie. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. All right. So how might this look in U-46? This is an example. This is a case study. And this could be something that occurs at Washington Elementary School when we're talking about molding today's modern learning with historical buildings in your district. Washington was one of the schools that was recommended for some renovation and additions, maintaining the existing historical nature of the facility in the neighborhood. MAURY Elementary School is a good case study. It's a Washington, D.C. public school. It's located on a very tight urban site, much like your older facilities built in 1886. So it's a 4-square building. And with the addition, you see it on the right, it's a white building that's more modern look. Purposely chosen to be different to accent the existing historical nature of the building, but with a connecting multi-purpose commons that serves their dining, their gym, their community space. So it's blending old and new with the community and with that center space, but also renovating and adapting the existing building to be able to meet modern teaching and learning needs. So the point that the takeaway here is that it's possible with some of your aging facilities to be able to modernize and have these same features that these mentioned. The next series of slides will be just highlighting things that are achievable in building renovations at each of your buildings, and what we see in modern school design. So safe and welcoming, having those direct entry points, visitor check-in, screening before entering in the rest of the building or meeting with teachers and students if necessary. Hands-on learning, we talked about the importance of those different activities, collaboration, physical activity, project-based learning. The example up on the top right, it used to be an elementary school locker room. Now it's their STEM space adjacent to their old gym, which is their library. So that connection of research with their ability to go in and inform their project activities in their STEM room. Examples of collaborative spaces. And when we show these examples, we mean purposeful collaborative spaces designed within your buildings. Because a lot of you may find that those collaboration spaces right now are sitting on the floor in hallways, maybe pulling out in small group spaces and chairs, and they're not really equipped to be able to support students and teachers in those paired and small group activities appropriately. Outdoor learning and sustainability is really important. We talked about the connection with nature, but having, again, purposefully designed spaces for outdoor education. It's not just putting a concrete slab against your building and say, go out and have a class, because then you have issues with glare, you have issues with elements, etc. So how do we purposefully design that space so that it can enhance teaching and learning? And also putting things like sustainability, green roofs or renewable energy, or even just how a building fundamentally works on display so students can learn from the building. The building is a teaching tool. We talked about having flexible and adaptable spaces. A lot of older buildings are very rigid in construction. So CMU, concrete block walls that are very hard to move and relocate. We're not saying this is the key in every space, but having some flexibility and adaptability in your construction types, but also the ability to have varying space sizes, open and closed, but still be able to monitor. That's important to teachers. And it's also important for students to see what's going on, right? It gets them excited about education. Hey, what are they doing over there? I want to do that, right? And engaging in student-centered spaces. A lot of times, we'll go into school and we'll see schools are adapted around adults. Adults are, these children range from pre-K to high school. They are different sizes. They need spaces that are designed for them, furniture that is designed for them. They work in odd places on the floor, tight little balls, reading, and the key is designing and engaging them in their surroundings. We talked about in technology. Technology is not going away. So how do we adapt our spaces to be able to better accommodate teaching and learning needs with equipment or power, what have you? And health and wellness. I know this is probably on the forefront of many of your minds, especially after the last couple of years. It's not just about physical fitness when we talk about health and wellness. It's about mental wellness as well. And it's about teaching and being able to accommodate our students that might have the highest sensitivities and needs as well. So I'll leave you with a quote from Dewey before we go into our small work group activity. Teaching in spaces to support such should really reflect how our students learn today, and should also reflect the world they will emerge into. So this is a world that's rapidly changing, as you all know. It's connected, it's adapting, and it's evolving. So our spaces need to be that way too. One of the community chairs will come up for the small group activity.
Thank you. Let's hear a round of applause. All right, so we've learned a lot, right? And so now it's time for us to hear from you guys. They have done extensive work in their respective fields, and so they know how all of these workspaces affect our kids, right? So now with this information that we received, how do we think that our students learn? Because we pay attention to them, we see them every day, we talk to them after school, right? And so now we want to hear from you. At each table and on Zoom, we're going to need a recorder and a facilitator. And again, the recorder is for the virtual participants will do the same in their breakout rooms, and you'll be invited to join those in a little bit. So for the recorder, your job, for those of you who were not here our first session, the recorder is responsible for completing the worksheet. So if you guys look at your tables, you guys have a pink, purple sheet that needs to be filled out. Make sure to complete the information in the box in the upper right-hand corner. Okay. The facilitator should facilitate the discussion. So keep the group focused so that the work is completed on time, and the report table results. That's your feedback to us. So we've heard from them. Now we want to make sure that we get your feedback so that we can keep going in this process. Please make sure that the information is recorded on the group's worksheet, reflects the general agreement. We don't want to just hear one voice within your group. We want to learn from everybody. Okay. So everybody's voice is heard, not just the point of one or two individuals. And monitor the time to make sure that you get everything done on time, and then we leave on time, and then we finish on time. So we'll start the reporting out in say half an hour, I believe. Yes, in about half an hour. At the end of the session, we will only collect the worksheet that has been completed by the recorder. So again, that purple one on Zoom, you guys will have a breakout room, and you will be able to submit your form online. That is the official form that we collect. Okay. So for our virtual participants, we will now be sending you into the breakout rooms. You will need to select your facilitator and recorder from those in your breakout room. If you have any questions, you can leave your breakout room into the main room, and then we will be there to help you out. Right, so everybody virtually, you will be randomly selected. For those of you who are in person, you will be moving into, or you will be in your table. And again, choose your people, and we're going to get started. Thank you.